All right. Let's talk flavors here on the Exam Room podcast brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hi, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. So many people say, well, look, I want to eat healthy, but if I do it the right way, I'm not getting any flavor whatsoever. My food is so bland. And then you have other people who straight up put their heels in the sand and they're like, look, no salt, no oil, no sugar, no meat. They throw up the deuces and they just walk away from the table. They say, there's absolutely no way I could ever eat that. But the fact of the matter is, you can eat an entirely healthy meal without the salt, without the fat, without the sugar, and still have a world of flavor right on your plate. So how do you do that? Today, we will be speaking with a chef and food editor of VegWorld Magazine. She also happens to be the author of the cookbook, Love the Foods That Love You Back. With that, we welcome Cathy Katin-Grazzini to the Exam Room. Hello, so good to see you, Cathy.
Hey, Chuck, great to see you too.
All right, let's talk SOS. Let's talk about saving ourselves and flavor at the same time. So if somebody is cutting the salt, the oil, and the sugar out of their diet, and they're still looking to have those bold flavors on their plate, what's the secret there?
Oh, yeah, there are so many things you can do. You don't have to sacrifice flavor whatsoever. The vegetables and the fruits and the whole grains and the legumes, all the herbs and spices and fungi, the mushroom kingdom, everything that's available widely and so easily available from all over the world at our fingertips today. There's so many techniques that you can use. So let me share a couple right off the top of my head. You can start with the vegetables, for example, and by roasting tomatoes and roasting peppers, you can concentrate their flavors, reduce the liquids in them, and they caramelize those sugars. And I use those in a million different ways, in sauces and in glazes and just in ingredients and different recipes. And that's one way to start off with a foundation of flavor. You can braise your dishes. So you start them in a pan, and you soften, you cook those vegetables, and then you finish them in the oven where they reduce the liquid once again, and the flavors can pop. You can cook vegetables and fruits in parchment paper with herbs, and you just simply roast them in parchment, stapled to the underneath and around. And potatoes are a great way to cook that way. They get crispy on the outside, they're soft and creamy on the inside, and with rosemary or sage and thyme, and that's another way to go. But then there's, as I mentioned, the herbs. All my recipes in the cookbook and elsewhere are very rich with taking advantage of herbs and spices, because that lends local flavor. It gives character and it costs pennies to do that. You can have a little herb garden outside your window like I do, that I just freshly clip every time I'm making a dish of different sorts. You can use mushrooms fresh and compress them in a pan, sear them till they get crispy on the edges, and with a little bit of pepper, you can have an incredible experience with mushrooms. And use dried mushrooms and grind them into a powder and use that as a seasoning for lots of umami pop to your pilafs and risottos and soups and stews and so many different things.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, let me interrupt you here. You're running down like a whole laundry list of things. I think that for the newbie chefs, they're like, I hear you, but I mean, seriously, if we roast those vegetables, can you still get that sweet flavor? Like, how would that compare to adding sugar to a recipe that a lot of us have been trained to do since we could cook? Can you still get that same level of sweet just by roasting those peppers, as you were saying,
absolutely.
or using sweet potatoes?
Absolutely. And also fruits and dried fruits are full of their own natural sweetness, as are many vegetables as well. And when you reduce them, either using dried fruits or roasting, one of my favorite things is to roast plums and peaches and apricots. Now we're in that season, we're so lucky. And you roast them, and it just concentrates their flavors. And they, I don't know if you've ever barbecued pineapple and peaches and so forth. They're incredibly sweet. more than you might realize. People like to say that salt and sugar and so forth, brings that olive oil, brings out the flavor of dishes. But I beg to differ, because they really mask the flavor of dishes, and you lose our sensitivity. You dull down your senses, so that's all you're really tasting. But when you get rid of those super inflammatory elements out of our cooking, you all of a sudden you can begin to perceive the subtle and wonderfully rich variety of flavors that you get from fruits and vegetables and whole grains and beans and mushrooms and everything else, unmasked. And it kind of wakes up our senses, because we've been dulled by the cuisine that Americans more and more have gravitated to through marketing and availability and cost and everything else, and it's a shame.
For sure. So we've got the sweet covered there, but what about the people that are like, I don't really have a sweet tooth, but I do like salt with my dishes. So if you're trying to cook, but you don't want to add the salt to the dishes, what are some foods that we could gravitate toward that still kind of have maybe a natural sodium occurring that's a lot healthier, perhaps?
Sure. So there's people don't realize that there is sodium in our vegetables as well. I often find that when I'm working with leafy greens, just all, beet greens or spinach greens, if you taste them raw in particular, you will taste how saline they truly are. And we just don't really appreciate it because we're so over salting our dishes. But one ingredient that I, especially for people that are new to this way of preparing their foods and are, the leap to salt-free would be a very big step. And, salt is one of the tastes that we are imbued with in our mouth to perceive. And that is, I work with miso paste quite often, because the studies that have been done out of Japan, human studies on miso, indicate that they actually are heart healthy. They, in spite of their saline content, they reduce heart rate and they don't elevate blood pressure. So for the time being, as long as the data is pointing in this direction very strongly, they're a lot less salty than salt itself, and you can flavor to taste, based on your own preferences. There are very mild miso pastes like shiro white miso, which is fermented for just a number of months, to the slightly stronger, darker, richer tasting aka misos, and there's a whole bunch of gradations in between with what people have fermented and made available. And you can dehydrate your miso paste, and this is in the cookbook as well, into a powder that I grind into a powder and use it as a finishing salt, so to speak, a finishing flavor that you can use very, very little, and melts right on the tip of your tongue, while you're eating it, and you can really bring down the salinity and the danger to our arteries and to our gut from eating table salt, for example.
Cathy, when did you become a miso master? It sounds to me like you've tried every form of it under the sun.
I am fascinated by miso paste. And they lend so much character, they have so much flavor, and they can because it's not just the saline composition, because they're fermented with koji. It's a type of culture, a type of mold. They are very rich in subtle flavors, and the substrate could be soybeans, but often they're made with other legumes and grains as well. So there's just so many possibilities, and they really lend a unique character to various dishes, not just Asian dishes. I use them across the board. So people have those options when they're looking at the recipes in the cookbook, for example. They can use them and use them a little bit, flavor them to as much or as little as they want, or omit it altogether if they prefer that as well. So gives them all your options.
So we've talked about the salt, we've talked about the sugar. Now let's talk about keeping things low with fat. And the first thing that a lot of us turn to then is taking the oil out, and thus the SOS part of it, salt, oil, sugar.
Right.
What are some of the ways that you would recommend somebody begin to cook without oil? We've talked on the show previously about water sautés. Beyond that, what are some tips that you could give the exam roomies?
Yeah, well, let me start a little bit. This is such a great question because this is typically the thing where people that don't have even people with culinary training, they make a mental leap and they assume, well, I'm used to cooking with oils and fats. If I'm going to saute anything as a foundation, a sofrito, a battuto, an Italian battuto, mirepoix for French dish or whatever, it's the foundation of most stews and soups and casseroles and so forth. I'm not using oils, I'll just have to use liquid. And what ends up happening with the way people think they should approach water sauteing is that they just add a liquid right in the pot, when they're adding their aromatics at the beginning of the process of cooking their dish. But what you end up doing is you basically are steaming all your vegetables at the get-go, and you never develop those caramelized flavors from those onions or shallots and celery and carrots and so forth that might be the foundation of your dish. So instead, you do it dry on a hot pan. You just put those vegetables in there to begin with. They're full of water. People don't realize how much water content are in, our produce. Just let them cook right on their own on a medium flame in a hot pot, and they will begin to release their liquid. And that's the foundation and how you begin to build flavor when you're doing a saute, for example. And after 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes or so forth, stirring around, you'll see that the pan will begin to darken, your vegetables will begin to darken a little bit. It's at that point, and that point only, that you would introduce just a little bit of liquid. And it could be a juice or a salt-free broth. It could be vermouth or a wine of some sort. It could be any liquid that you want. It depends on the dish. And to just simply as a vehicle to deglaze that pan and scrape up those caramelized sugars that have adhered from your carrots and your onions, for example, at the bottom of your pan. And that's the beginning of your flavor. And you add your herbs then and your other aromatics, and you start to build flavor in your dish from the ground up. But you don't start with water. You don't start with liquid. That's where people go wrong often.
So when you start to see that browning on the bottom of the pan, initially, that's not time to panic. That doesn't mean that your food's burning, 911, the dish is ruined.
No, you're not walking away. This happens in a couple of minutes. So you're not going to leave the room and come back in 10 minutes. Then you might have a problem where things are really sticking. But you want that caramelization. Those are those sugars that natural sugars in the produce itself that really elevate a dish and begin to build flavor. And then depending on the dish, you add your chilies, you add your mushrooms, whatever it is you're cooking, your vegetables, longer, cooking ones first, heartier herbs first, and you go from there. And you add just a judicious amount of liquid as you go to prevent sticking, but not more than that unless it's required by the dish. But that's how you keep things from getting soggy and everything looking gray.
Yeah. So when you say a judicious amount, is that one of those things where I guess you just kind of have to learn by trial and error to figure out what that sweet spot is with the amount of liquid?
It's usually it's so little. It's a tablespoon or two. It's just what you need to be able to again, with a wooden spoon, scrape up those sugars, and then, because again, whatever you're adding in has water content in it too, and they're going to release the liquid as well. And you observe as you go. You use, in this way of cooking, you're using all your senses, your eyes, your ears, your nose, you're tasting as you go. It's such a sensual way of cooking. It's very fun. And you'll get a feel for it very quickly. This is not rocket science. It happens, it's a very natural sort of thing. And once you just do it once or twice, you start really getting comfortable with what we're working with, and it's not difficult to figure out how much liquid. You don't ever kind of want to look the way people used to do with oil. This is minimal amount of liquid, only as much as you need to keep things moving and to prevent sticking in your stainless pan.
And when you reach that point, you add that little bit of liquid. You're pretty much near the end of the cooking process, I would imagine, because in my experience, that water, it evaporates pretty quickly. It scrapes up that glaze, as you like to call it.
Yeah, well, there's a little. It depends what you're cooking. Let me try to make it concrete with. Let's say you're doing a stir fry. A kind of a Chinese stir fry. So there, you might have. You might be throwing in mushrooms. They're going to release a lot of water after you initially start. So you'll add them as well. You might have Chinese broccoli or, bok choy or zucchinis or, whatever kind of vegetables, red peppers, all full of moisture as well. So you want to keep things on the dry side. In a case of a stir fry, at the same time, when you do a stir fry, you want to have all your vegetables all prepped and ready to go, because it's a fast cooking thing at a fairly high heat, even without oil. And so your vegetables you're adding, based on their cooking time, and you've already mixed up your finishing glaze, which is simply some seasonings with arrowroot or cornstarch or whatever, a little bit of starch, a little bit of a whole grain flour, that you mix with water, and you might have a little, I don't know, black vinegar or tamari, or again, miso, to flavor your liquid, some Shaoxing wine perhaps, and that's at the very end when your vegetables are crispy cooked at the way you would want them in a stir fry. You glaze all those vegetables for the final 2 minutes. Toss them all around till the starches thicken a little bit and create a glazy sauce that finishes that dish.
You're such a foodie. I love it. Shaoxing wine. That is definitely, in the 5 seasons that we've been doing the exam room, never once come up. I absolutely adore it. You know what you're doing in the kitchen, but that is not the case for everyone. There are a lot of people who are scared to go back into the kitchen or enter the kitchen arena for the very first time because they think, I could never cook. I could never do what Cathy's doing. I couldn't even follow these recipes in their book. I burned water, for goodness sakes. So if somebody is new to the culinary experience and cooking their own meals, what advice do you have that could help get them comfortable in the kitchen?
Well, okay. Well, I'm love the foods that love you back. I had that in mind from the get-go, because so many people have stopped cooking. I've met so many people my age and older who said, I'm done. My kids are out of the house. That's it. I'm now, it's the easy street. I don't want to cook anymore. Or kids, my son's age and younger, who are millennials and, Gen Z and so forth, that just never grew up with cooking. We're eating processed foods all the time and still are taking out. And that's part of the way they're living. So in the building blocks, it's the very first recipe chapter in the cookbook. I have all sorts of easy and fairly fast recipes, simple sauces that you can make with vegetables or just simply serve over pasta or whole grains, or, there's the simple yogurt that I use in dressings and to make cheeses out of, and just, in sauces and just all sorts of ways. There's a wonderful red sauce and a white sauce. These classic, even a sauce made with roasted peppers that I was talking about before, because they're so flavorful. You can just throw them in a blender and make a sauce out of it. Or garden tomatoes or store-bought tomatoes. Just throw them in there and, cook them down. And you've got a wonderful rustic tomato sauce, which you can use over baked potatoes or grains or in a million different ways. But lots and lots of easy, simple recipes. And then there are soups and so many other, simple and fast dishes, as well as some that are more celebratory. But for the food shy, cooking was not meant, and traditionally it never was a solitary activity. It wasn't one person cooking for the rest of the family and lonely in the kitchen doing his or her thing. No, cooking was a communal, it was a familial, there was generational. So my best advice is to make it a party, have a neighbor or a good friend who wants to walk this journey with you and learn to cook. Get them in the kitchen with you, turn on some music, pour yourself something, tasty and refreshing to drink and have fun. We evolved around a fire pit, cooking, sharing food, eating together. It's not just the nourishment, it's the emotional and social connection that we get when we cook and eat and share what we've created together, which is so missing in our culture right now and so vital for our mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical health. So
no question about it. And going back again about that simplicity, you were talking about the sweet pepper sauce. I mean, I've got it right here on page 62 of the cookbook. And this is just 3 ingredients that you can do in 20 minutes. And it's not like you have to slave over the stove for all of those 20 minutes. No, you put the peppers in the oven. And then once they've done their thing in there, then you blend it all up. I mean, you're talking about your actual commitment there is probably like somewhere in the ballpark of 5 minutes, something like that. Very easy to do.
Yeah. There's an artichoke sauce, very similar as well in there too. So there, yeah, sorry.
That's what I'm talking about. Artichoke sauce. Okay. I'm feeling good about that. Cathy, the last question that I have for you is about introducing new flavors into our palate, right? We all have somebody in our life whose menu for their entire life has really extended no further than peanut butter and jelly or grilled cheese sandwiches or chicken nuggets. We're talking about people who have never had a taste of Chinese food, never even had a burrito. So how can you kind of nudge somebody out of their culinary comfort zone and try all of these new flavors?
Yeah. Wow. I feel sorry for the people that are so restricted, but we all start where we start. None of us, have had, most of us have not eaten the globe. We start with the culture or the whatever we grew up with, whatever we, start with. I would start there. With what's familiar, what's comfortable, what's not threatening, an easy cheesy sauce instead of melted mozzarella, that's in the cookbook. That takes no time, 10, 15 minutes to make. Then you can gradually, put a toe in the water, get exposed to another culture. I mean, you don't have to go high spice if you're shy about doing that. There's just, Italian cooking is very ubiquitous. Most people have had their pizzas and their pastas and so forth. You can start there with plant-based. If you like nachos, even if you haven't had traditional Mexican cooking, you can start with beans and chilies and purees and just, introduce yourself to some of these seasonings, because the spice, it's not just for flavor, it's for our health as well. All of these herbs and spices are loaded with polyphenols. In fact, this whole cookbook is like a polyphenol, cookbook. What are polyphenols? They're compounds that are just in plants that are so rich in antioxidants. They just do amazing things for us and for our gut health as well. And so the more we can just, gently expand our horizons, starting with what's familiar and branching out slightly in different directions, different combinations, adding a new vegetable once a week, or trying some spices from a different cuisine. Oh, today I'm going to try something Indian or Mexican or, Japanese or whatever it is. It's just such a pleasure, and it's a cornucopia of possibilities that are out there. Why limit ourselves? It's better for our health. It's better for the planetary health. All of these foods are so low in the carbon emissions that they generate relative to animal agriculture. It's just like there's no comparison. It's what we can do for ourselves and for our families and our communities. And it's so fun. It's such a pleasure. It's so enriching. So, don't feel shy about it. I mean, if you're cooking and you're not experienced, what's the very worst thing that can happen? After all, it's a very low risk thing. You might, I don't know, it might not come out exactly the way you want it, but it will still be good. No matter what you do, you can't go wrong. And so you can just, take it wherever you start and go from there.
That's the key. I mean, you can't go wrong. It's just like take that little step outside of the comfort zone. You're not going to mess it. It reminds me of like Bob Ross's theory when it came to painting. I don't know if you ever watched The Joy of
Sure.
Painting. He
Yeah.
said that there were only happy little mistakes, right? It's the painting was never ruined. It just
Exactly.
something happened and you just go with it. And that's cool, right? But I'm just looking at the table of contents here, Cathy, in the book, and it really is. I mean, it is just a tour of taste here. I mean, the table of contents here, just under soups alone, you've got Latvian lentil soup, Greek vegetable stew, Turkish eggplant lentil stew. You've got an Ethiopian vegetarian stew, and then over in the breads, you've got an Armenian stuffed flatbread. You've got mapao tofu, Asian inspired. I mean, you've got literally flavors from all over, including Italy, as you mentioned. And I mean, there is something for everyone. And I love the fact that you do kind of graduate from those simpler recipes into something that it takes a little bit more time and energy and effort. But at the same time, I didn't stumble across any recipe in this book that even somebody who's kind of a novice in the kitchen, such as myself, should be intimidated by. When you look at how you break these things down, it really is something that even a newbie can jump right into page 222 and give that recipe a go. I have no idea what that recipe is, but I'm pretty sure they could just jump in and do it. Was that something you were cognizant of as you were putting this together?
Yeah. I just, I wanted to explain the recipes are constructed in a way that they explain in great detail what's involved, what the ingredients are, even if you've never used a certain ingredient before, what to look for as you're cooking so that you're staying sort of on track. And my hope with the cookbook, as strange as this might sound, is that people will get enough feel for working with plants and fruits and whole grains and so forth in this very healthy way that eventually they won't need a cookbook. They'll develop the right instincts just by making these recipes a couple of times, that they can go off the grid and take advantage of whatever really looks great in the marketplace or in the farmer's market at any given time, to come home and say, "Ooh, what am I going to do with this today? I'm going to use these herbs. I'm going to combine these things. I'm going to make a beautiful saute or a salad or a soup." And then it's just incredibly liberating once you learn your ABCs. And I hope that this could be a roadmap so to free people up to really find their inner chef.
And just to confirm, I did flip over to page 222, and it is a delicious recipe for plum chestnut tartlets. So who wouldn't want to add that to their dessert menu, right? I mean, that's just absolutely gorgeous. Cathy, thank you so much for your time. The book is Love the Foods That Love You Back. There is a link to it right now in the show description or in the episode notes. Absolutely pick up your copy, and I would love to have you back sometime. This has just been a fantastic half hour.
Thank you, Chuck. I've enjoyed it too. Thanks so much.
If your health IQ is a couple of points higher than it was a few minutes ago, go ahead and like this video or subscribe to the YouTube channel. And to take it even higher, head over to Apple Podcast or wherever you get your favorite shows. Look for The Exam Room by the Physicians Committee. Hit the subscribe button there as well and help to make your world a healthier place.